Welcome to Fayetteville Technical Community College, and thank you for attending the college's second annual Living Law Project presentation. The Living Law Project began in 2022 with an interdisciplinary group of scholars who wish to highlight some of our nation's important court cases for the public. The project creates short documentary films on these cases and hosts public forums in which students and members of the community can ask local leaders questions about important legal issues. Last year, the project focused on Miranda versus Arizona, the landmark case in 1966 that gave rise to what has become known as the Miranda warning and Miranda rights. This year, the project is focused on Gonzalez versus Raich, a case dealing with medical marijuana. This case stands at the intersection of critical issues including healthcare, drug abuse, and the American experiment with dual federalism. Today, the project will play a short new film produced right here at Fayetteville Tech. Then, invite students and members of the community to ask questions to our panel of community experts. We hope this is enlightening and interesting for you. Again, thank you for coming.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this second, what I think will be annual, Living Law discussion. I think we do have a very interesting discussion today that I'm excited to hear. I've had the opportunity to meet our panelists, and some of the things we talked about are just very insightful, and I think we'll hear a lot of that during this session. For our panelists, I do want you to know that our audience has spent quite a bit of time preparing for this. I understand that they all have been eating munchies lately this afternoon, so I'm not sure what that says, but I would also point out to our audience that our panelists have had a really ruckus time next door in what we call the green room, and that included gummies and brownies. So if we get a little silly here today, well, I guess that's just the way it works. We are glad that you're here with us today for this important discussion. Before we get into the panel discussion, there are some things, some housekeeping matters we need to do or take care of. And the first one of those is to thank both the Fayetteville Technical Community College Foundation and our Student Government Association, the foundation for providing a mini grant to put this on, and to the Student Government Association for funding for the food you ate. So if you don't mind, let's give both of those organizations a round of applause. We could not put this on without their efforts, without their funding. We also have some awards we want to announce, and if I could call Ms. Morelli or Ms. Morrill and Ms. Smith up to the respective sides here. We're going to start with awards for the courtroom sketches. And let me point out to you, these fine trophies that you see here were actually created on our 3D printing machines. Our librarian, Mr. Rizzio, is absolutely a master at this. She's shared Christmas ornaments with us before that were made on the 3D printing machine, and these are just amazing trophy cups, if you will. So on the courtroom sketches by our fine arts students, if y'all could come forward, please. We have two students that we want to recognize. Miss Rachel Mishu created the colored pencil sketches that you see there. And Miss Sophia Geppert did the watercolors that you see here. They both did a fine job, and as you'll see in a video in a few minutes, and as you see on the materials that have been handed out, we have made good use of your work. So thank you very much for your contribution. And we also have, there was a poster design competition for our graphic arts and design students. Instructor Sarah Smith, I understand, led that, and we have 4 awards that we want to announce today associated with the posters. The first is the Campus Choice Award, which this was hung in the library and was voted on by our students. And the Campus Choice Award goes to Corina Silverman. Third place in this competition goes to Miss Mackenzie Joy. Second place goes to Miss Jamie Bach. And the first place here was Mr. Dominic Williams. I believe Mr. Williams created the design for the poster that we've used all over the place. We want to thank all the students that participated in these competitions. Again, we could not have put this on with such fine materials without your efforts, so thank you again. As we did last year, we created a video. Last year, we created a video that dealt with the Miranda case. This year, we're looking at Gonzalez versus Raich, and our fine folks, I guess, on the committee that put this effort together or put this event together are all going to appear. So we're very pleased to see that, and we'll roll that video now explaining what is Gonzalez versus Raich.
On August 15, 2002, a drug enforcement agency-led SWAT team raided the home of Angel Raich. The members of law enforcement destroyed marijuana plants, which were illegal drugs under federal law, but legal medicinal plants under California law.
Miss Angel Raich, I am Agent Osborne with the DEA. I am here because I have a warrant for your arrest, ma'am.
No,
Ma'am,
you can't do this.
Yeah, ma'am, I am so sorry. If you would please stand up. Ma'am, I understand that.
I have a brain tumor.
And I understand, ma'am, and that is so
This is for my pain.
Yes, ma'am,
Wait,
and-
when I have this,
Ma'am, I
can't.
can't argue with you. This is a time-sensitive matter. We have to go. If you would please stand up and place your hands behind your back.
Please
You're
don't hurt
medically-
me.
No, ma'am, I would
Please
never
don't
hurt
hurt
you.
me.
No, ma'am, I would not. If you would place your hands behind your back, are you able to do so?
yes.
Angel Raich, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to have an attorney present. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you at no cost to you.
Attorney General Alberto Gonzalez gave Solicitor General Paul Clement the difficult task of arguing the federal government's case before the Supreme Court.
Hi, Paul. How you doing?
Good afternoon.
How you
sir.
doing this morning?
I am doing good, sir. Thank you.
Awesome, great. We have this case that is going to be argued in front of the Supreme Court, and I want you to handle it. It's a case on medical marijuana in California, so please give it a look and let me know.
That is such a great honor to be able to argue this case. Sir, thank you.
Absolutely. Good luck.
Thank you, sir.
Speaking on behalf of the United States, Clement argued that under the Controlled Substances Act, Congress had comprehensively regulated the national market in drugs with the potential for abuse.
Justice Stevens, and may it please the court. Through the Controlled Substance Act, Congress has comprehensively regulated the national market in drugs with the potential for abuse.
With respect to Schedule I substances, like marijuana,
that have both a high potential for abuse and no currently accepted medical use and treatment, Congress categorically prohibits interstate trafficking outside the narrow and carefully controlled confines of federally approved research programs. Clement also argued that the federal government had the right to regulate marijuana under the Interstate Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor pressed Clement on the commerce issue, pointing out that under California law, no medical use marijuana produced in California would ever be exported out of California, and that commerce within states is the area of something traditionally regulated by states.
As I understand it, if California's law applies, then none of this homegrown for medical use marijuana will be on any interstate market. And it is in the area of something traditionally regulated by states.
Justice O'Connor asked Clement how the federal government could justify regulating marijuana if it was not a component of interstate commerce. Clement replied that there was no reason to assume that California's government could possibly keep marijuana grown in California from being sold outside the state.
Well, Justice O'Connor, let me first say that I think it might be a bit optimistic to think that none of the marijuana that's produced consistent with California law would be diverted into the national market for marijuana.
Well,
into
but
the national
in
market.
Looking at this broad challenge, do we have to assume that the state of California will enforce its law? I mean, if it turns out that it isn't and that
think that there's any reason to assume that California is going to have some sort of almost unnatural ability to keep one part of a fungible national drug market separate.
Speaking on behalf of Angel Raich, Randy Barnett addressed the court.
I have 2 points to make. First, the class activities involved here, in this case, are non-economic and wholly intrastate. Second, the federal prohibition of this class of activities is not essential. It is not an essential part of the larger regulatory scheme.
Barnett argued that medical marijuana produced in California was only for use in California, that it was medical and not economic activity, and that since it was not commercial activity, the federal government had no right to regulate it under the Interstate Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution. Barnett warned the court that if the court allowed the federal government to prohibit the use of medical marijuana in California, they would vastly expand the power of the federal government to regulate commerce within states, a horrific power grab that would deprive states of their rightful authority to regulate commerce within their borders. Justice David Souter pressed Barnett on this issue and asked him what would prevent medical marijuana in California from spilling over into the black market in other states.
But I don't see what reason that you have given, or any reason that you haven't given, for us to believe that out of, and I'm going to assume for the sake of argument, 100,000 potential users, everybody is going to get it from a friend or from plants in the backyard. Seems to me the sensible assumption is they're going to get it on the street. And once they get it, under California law, it's not a crime for them to have it and use it. But they're going to get it in the street. Why isn't that the sensible assumption here?
Well, they have a very strong incentive not to get it on the street, because getting it on the street is going to subject them to criminal prosecution under both California and federal law. It's also the case that approximately 10% of the American population is doing that every day, if I accept the figures in the government's brief, and they're not getting prosecuted.
In response, Barnett emphasized that this was a program for sick people in desperate need of medical care, and that these sick people had a very strong incentive to keep their medicine for themselves.
In that case, we're talking about people who are using it for sport, for recreation. We are talking about a class of people here who are sick people.
He argued that these sick patients would not trade their life-saving medication for the few dollars they might earn for selling a product which was already widely available for very low prices on the black market.
cannabis does have a substantial medical effect. Smoked cannabis does carry with it harms associated with it, as General Clement correctly pointed out. It does carry with it these ancillary harms, but when people are sick and people are suffering and people are dying, they may be willing to run the risk of these long-term harms in order to get the immediate relief, the life-saving relief that cannabis has demonstrably been able to provide.
In a 6-3 opinion delivered by Justice John Paul Stevens, the court held that the Commerce Clause gave Congress the authority to prohibit the local cultivation and use of marijuana despite state law to the contrary. Stevens argued that the court's precedent firmly established Congress's Commerce Clause power to regulate purely local activities that are part of a class of activities with a substantial effect on interstate commerce. The majority argued that Congress could ban local marijuana because it was a class of activities that impacted interstate commerce, since there was no way to guarantee that medical marijuana in California would not be exported to other states. Since the Supreme Court declared California's medical marijuana law illegal in 2004, several other states have passed similar legislation in direct violation of the court's findings. The medical marijuana controversy is far from over, and leading experts continue to debate the medical value and the legalities of medical marijuana.
One of the biggest harms is the addiction. Having served 18 years in law enforcement, I dealt with individuals that at one time were just marijuana smokers. Once you no longer have that high, you're gonna search for something bigger. They just wanted that higher fix that they were no longer getting from marijuana. Some folks move from marijuana to pills that either not prescribed to them or pills that they cannot afford, which now throws them into criminality. Taking from others, selling what is not yours. Those are some of the harms of marijuana usage.
As regards the medical use of marijuana, there is a component or drug that is available. Marijuana is a mind-altering psychoactive drug, and tetrahydrocannabinol, also known as THC, is believed to be the main psychoactive component that produces this effect. Personal experience in my patients, people who had refractory nausea and vomiting, they benefited immensely when every other drug that we utilized failed. When used appropriately and under appropriate guidance, this drug has many beneficial uses. It has incredibly good use, especially in the setting of chronic pain, difficult to deal with nausea and vomiting in patients, and also for its appetite stimulating effect in people who have terminal cancer, for example.
And we do want to say thank you to the Living Law Committee for producing such a perfect video, and for Judge Ammons for letting us use the courthouse in the production of the video, for the video production team. They've done a first-class job on that video. We're very proud of it. Although I have been asked to tell you that no marijuana plants were actually used or harmed during the making of this video. So for all law enforcement out there, Chief Baylor, no violation of the law occurred here. With that, I'll invite our panelists to come on up and take their seats. And I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to our panelists. We're going to start with Judge Ammons, James Ammons. He is a senior resident Superior Court judge here in Cumberland County in District 14. I believe he's been serving as a Superior Court judge now for 25 years. In that role as a Superior Court judge, he has heard, I think, 250 jury trials, or maybe during his time as a judge, he's heard 250 jury trials. As a defense attorney and prosecutor, he probably heard about 150 trials. And he is famous or infamous for his participation or sitting now as the Superior Court resident judge for the Leandro case, which I think is before the Supreme Court right now for decision on an appeal that has been made. Judge Ammons is a graduate of Lewisburg College. He's got a bachelor's degree and his Juris Doctorate from Chapel Hill, UNC Chapel Hill. But his real claim to fame is that he is married to Fayetteville Tech's own Sandy Ammons, the director of Fayetteville Tech's Foundation. And we're glad to have you here, Judge Ammons, and glad to have you here too, Sandy. Next, I forgot to mention, he does have two children, Sarah and Jamie, and I think they're about to gain a son-in-law within the next few months. So congratulations on that. I didn't know that. Well, congratulations on that too. Big event. Next, let me introduce you to Dr. Rakesh Gupta. Dr. Gupta is a gastroenterologist, and I've got to tell you, as the father of a son who only has 25% of his large intestines, we are very fond of our gastroenterologist. Dr. Gupta is a fellow with the American College on Gastroenterology, and he serves as an outpatient consultant at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center as a gastroenterologist. He's retired from private practice. He spent about 30 years in private practice at the Cape Fear Center for Digestive Diseases and was an active staff member at the Cape Fear Valley Hospital. He is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Cape Fear Valley Hospital, or was for 9 years from 2000 to 2009. He's a community volunteer. He's retired from the Board of Directors of the Cumberland Community Foundation. He is a trustee of the Hindu Bhavan Temple in Fayetteville. He's a founding member of that. Vice chair of the Board of Directors of the Cape Fear Valley Health Foundation. He's currently the chairman of the Board of Trustees at Methodist University, and he's a member of the Board of Trustees, or was a member, has been a member since 2013. Incredibly active servant of our community. Next, let me introduce Dr. John Lesica. Dr. Lesica is a child psychiatrist who's been in our community for about 34 years after training in pediatric psychiatry and child psychiatry in the U.S. Army. He is chief of the Child and Behavioral Health Services at Womack Army Medical Center. He started his medical career after 11 years in the Army. He started at the Cape Fear Valley Medical Center as chief of the Child and Adolescent Unit from 1994 through 2005. He's later served as the lead psychiatrist at the Cumberland County Mental Health Center, and he has been blessed to assist in creating and leading Womack's Center for Child and Behavioral Health Services at Womack for the last 11 years. Next, let me introduce you Alexandra Robinson. Ms. Robinson, who is, she's just spent a lot of time at UNC Chapel Hill, more time than you should really want to spend, but she has spent a lot of time there. She has has earned her bachelor's degree in global studies and public policy from UNC, and she is currently working on her PhD in the Department of Public Policy. Her specialty is ethics, and she is a graduate fellow in the UNC Parr Center for Ethics. Her research has included looking at bioethics and adolescent health policy. She has an incredible resume. She has served as a consultant for youth empowerment and intergenerational justice for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. I think that is kind of a UN sort of thing. Yeah, something like a UN sort of thing. And she spent 6 years working for ASIC. In fact, I think she was the global president for ASIC, which I looked up what ASIC meant, and it's French, and I'm not even going, I guess it's French. I think it's French. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but it's one of the world's leading youth organizations, boasting something like 40,000 members in 110 countries. And I think with ASIC, she has worked in the United States, Egypt, and Canada. And finally, let me introduce you on the end to Major Terry Ray. He is a retired member of the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office. He has spent over 30 years of his life working in law enforcement, and I think just retired in November of 2021, but apparently retirement didn't take too well. And he has come to work at Fayetteville Tech in our basic law enforcement program, and currently works part-time back with the Sheriff's Office, doing in-service training and new basic law, or for new basic law enforcement recruits out at the Earl R. Butler Training Center, which just happens to be near the Fayetteville Technical Community College Fire and Rescue Training Center. Out there, they have, at the Earl Butler Center, they have an incredible driving track, and I think Major Ray spends a bit of time on that track teaching recruits how to drive. He also spends quite a bit of time on the shooting range, again teaching recruits how to use their weapons. Major Ray attended Lees-McRae College in Banner Elk and spent his weekends at the Ski Beach Resort, I guess, or at least the winter weekends. Other than that, he played football. He was a member of the football team at Lees-McRae College. He returned home from Lees-McRae and pursued his career in law enforcement and became a deputy sheriff originally at the age of 21, where he was under the direction of Sheriff Morris Bedsole. He, as I mentioned, he is now a field training officer with the Patrol Division. He also served, oh my, this just goes on and on. He served on the SWAT team for over 8 years. He was an investigator with the Narcotics Division for 10 years, a lieutenant with the Juvenile Section. He's had 2 cases that have been recognized by the United States Department of Justice as the case of the year. And one day I hope he shares those stories with us, because I bet there are quite good stories behind it, but both of those cases were recognized by the Department of Justice, their Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. He's been awarded the Order of the Longleaf Pine by Governor Cooper, and he and his wife Beth, who's an assistant district attorney, were both born and raised right here in Cumberland County. With that, let's give all 5 of our panelists a warm Fayetteville Tech welcome. And on behalf of Fayetteville Tech, we do welcome each one of you to this session, this panel discussion. We appreciate your generosity with your time and with your sharing knowledge with us. Y'all have spent quite a bit of time preparing for this. And on behalf of the college, please know that we do very much appreciate your efforts and what you're going to share with us today. With that in mind, we're going to begin this panel discussion, and we're going to call on Judge Ammons, who is going to give us a summary of the case and his thoughts on the case. Judge Ammons.
All right, thank you very much for that introduction. I want to thank FTCC President Dr. Mark Searles, Mary DeRizio, and everyone associated with the FTCC Living Law Project for inviting me again this year to come and speak. I am truly honored to be here with this distinguished panel of experts. I'd like to start with a brief synopsis of the case, a history of what has happened in this case since 2005, and then present some questions for your consideration. Marijuana use, possession, cultivation, and consumption has been regulated in the United States since at least the 1930s. In 1970, Congress banned the use of marijuana with the Federal Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act. Richard Nixon signed it into law. In 1996, California passed the Compassionate Use Act, which allowed citizens to use marijuana for medical purposes. California's legalization of marijuana had no effect on the federal statutes prohibiting its use, sale, and possession. It also provided protections for the patient's doctors, primary caregivers, and anyone who cultivated marijuana for personal medical purposes upon the written or oral recommendation or approval of a physician. The act did not authorize recreational use of marijuana. Angel Raich and Diane Monson were seriously ill Californians who used marijuana to manage their excruciating pain. California law enforcement officers knew about them and determined that their activities were legal. But federal law enforcement officers seized and destroyed Raich's and Monson's supply of marijuana, including 6 plants that Monson was cultivating. Now, Raich was unable to cultivate her own marijuana, and she had 2 assistants who grew the marijuana for her. After the seizure and destruction of the marijuana, Monson and Raich sued the federal government in 2002 for injunctive relief, claiming that under California law, they should be able to cultivate, possess, and use marijuana because of their medical needs. Raich's 2 assistants joined the lawsuit as John Doe 1 and John Doe 2. The Attorney General at the time was John Ashcroft, and he, at that time, was the named defendant. Now, they lost their case in the U.S. District Court, but the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed. The case was ultimately heard in the Supreme Court in 2005. The case was now known as Gonzalez versus Raich. The Supreme Court ruled that the Controlled Substances Act was constitutional and that Congress had the power to regulate activities that affect interstate commerce. They relied upon the court's prior interpretation of the Commerce Clause authority in Wickard versus Filburn. Wickard was similar in that the Supreme Court had ruled that Congress had the power to regulate the production of wheat in a single state. In both cases, the High Court recognized that production of an agricultural product in one state would affect other states. Now, Justice Scalia wrote a concurring opinion, agreeing with the majority result, but his reasoning was based on the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution. He said that Congress's intent of prohibiting marijuana from interstate market could be undercut if these activities were accepted from the general scheme of regulation. The result of Raich versus Gonzalez is that the federal government has the absolute power to seize and destroy marijuana in all 50 states, including in those states who had previously legalized marijuana use. The case says that Congress may ban the use, possession, and cultivation of cannabis even if one or more states approves of it for medical use. Congress has this power under the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. This even applies to homegrown marijuana, even if it's grown just for the use of medical purposes and not recreational purposes. Now, to some observers, this was the logical result of an interpretation of Congress's Commerce Clause authority to regulate interstate activity. To others, it was an extreme expansion of the Commerce Clause. But to Raich and Monson, this was a devastating blow to their quest to receive relief from unbearable pain and suffering. Raich, in fact, said she didn't care what the Supreme Court said. She was going to continue to use marijuana to ease her suffering. She indeed continued to fight on, and in 2007 filed her lawsuit again, this time on substantial due process grounds. This lawsuit was also unsuccessful. Now, to many of us, this seems illogical and even cruel to deny relief to people with chronic pain. Who among us would deny a fellow human compassionate care? If there is a drug that can provide relief to people who are suffering, and the drug is recommended by medical professionals, and the patient has made an informed choice and has been able to weigh the possible benefits against the possible side effects, should that person not be allowed to make that choice? But some other of us may say, the law is the law is the law is the law. When we begin to allow folks to obey only the laws they want to obey, are we not on our way to anarchy? We have a system of government that allows changes in our law that are deemed appropriate by a majority of our citizens, actually a majority of the folks who represent those citizens. Now, in the absence of a change in the law, sometimes policies change. In 2009, Attorney General Eric Holder issued new guidelines for the enforcement of federal laws regarding marijuana use for medical purposes. He said it would no longer be the objective of the federal law enforcement officers to prevent legitimate medical marijuana use. At the same time, he reinforced our country's commitment to stop illegal drug use and drug addiction. Now, Justice John Paul Stevens wrote this opinion. In his book, The Five Chiefs, Justice Stevens cites Gonzalez as a case where he upheld the law even though he deplored the policy. In 2014, a bill was passed in Congress and signed by Barack Obama to prohibit the federal government from arresting and prosecuting legitimate medical marijuana patients. In 2021, Clarence Thomas, who wrote a dissent in Gonzalez, said that Gonzalez needs to be revisited by the court because the federal government has a policy of turning a blind eye to medical marijuana possession in the 36 states which have now legalized it. Now, last year there was strong sentiment in the North Carolina General Assembly to legalize marijuana for medical purposes. Senate Bill 3, the North Carolina Compassionate Care Act, was introduced on January the 25th, 2023. It passed the Senate, but then it stalled out when it went to the House. Supporters argue that marijuana has been effective to help patients and PTSD sufferers. A recent poll conducted by Meredith College shows that 78% of North Carolinians support the legalization of medical marijuana, and only 18% oppose it. Some folks would go even further and legalize recreational use of marijuana. They argue that marijuana use is no different than alcohol use. They talk about lost tax revenue and the cost and the danger of enforcing what some folks call victimless crimes. And they talk about criminalizing recreational users of marijuana. For a lot of people, medical use is an easy question. If we have a drug that can alleviate physical pain and mental suffering, why not use it? Most of our drugs have side effects. Physicians and medical experts know the pros and the cons of the use of marijuana for each individual patient. Why not use this drug the same way that we use other highly addictive drugs? Recreational use for many is a different question. Recreational use can be a very slippery slope. There are many people who would never think of using marijuana simply because it's illegal. Surely, a certain percentage of those folks will try marijuana if it becomes legal. How many of those people will fall into chronic use and abuse of marijuana? There was a study done in Colorado after marijuana was legalized there. Health officials wanted to know why there were so many pregnant women who were testing positive for marijuana. Some of the answers the mothers gave were, it's legal, it must be okay to use. Nobody told me it was harmful for my baby. All my friends are using it. It's much safer to use than alcohol. I suggest that our study here of Gonzalez presents several questions. Should marijuana use be legal for medical purposes? Should marijuana use be legal for recreational purposes? Should we obey a law that we disagree with? How should we punish people who disobey a law on the grounds that the law is harmful and painful to them? If the vast majority of the American public is in favor of a particular piece of legislation, why can't we get Congress to pass a law that matches the will of the people? Panelists?
Now I can go home. Judge Ammons did such a wonderful job. So I am intrigued, and I was asked this question. I'm not an expert, by the way, on marijuana use or marijuana dispensation. I do believe, however, as a physician, especially in the field of gastroenterology, that it has a place to treat symptoms and should be treated like any other drug. And medical marijuana or medical cannabis is something that has been around for a long time. And the ingredient that we are specifically going to address from a medical standpoint is THC or delta-9 THC. There are other forms of tetrahydrocannabinol, and the CBD or cannabidiol. The benefit of the drug clearly, as it relates to chronic pain, nausea and vomiting, and wasting syndrome when people are unable to eat anything at all. So stimulating appetite, especially in folks that have HIV infection that is rampant or causing a problem, or in people who have terminal cancer. Interestingly, as I was preparing for this discussion, I came across an article that was in New York Times, and it becomes apparent that there are many seniors who are using cannabis for all sorts of things. This is an example of a lady who's 88 years old who has a cannabis club in Maryland, retirement community. She uses ChatGPT to produce an 89-page manual about medical cannabis. So she's the North Star. She is the guiding force. But there is no doubt that cannabis is being used, as Judge Ammons already pointed out, that if you poll the general population, 80% or thereabout people believe that there is a place for marijuana. The question is how, where, when, and by who. And whether or not it has benefit, I think we'll have an opportunity to discuss some of the side effects, some of the important precautions that need to be in place. For example, it's not something that pregnant women should be using. It can have very serious impact on the fetus and the baby. For example, people who have and I'm not an expert here, I have on my left side Dr. Lesica, who I've known for over 30 years. He's going to tell us everything that we shouldn't be using it for, and all of the ill effects that it has on the young mind, for example. But people who have a tendency towards psychosis, it can exacerbate and probably put them in serious danger. Or people who have, even seniors, somebody like me, smoke a joint, get into my car, and then I don't know where the heck I'm going. I certainly don't want to see Judge Ammons on the wrong side. So I think clearly there is a downside to it, and I by no means suggest that we have all of the answers. And it's also difficult to do studies because it's not approved by the FDA. It's a Schedule I drug. So at least under the current federal guidelines, it is something that does not, quote, have medicinal benefit, but has a very significant abuse potential. And therefore, I think we can debate, where it can be used medicinally, and I would argue that it can be. I mean, I see veterans every day in my gastroenterology consultation room, wherein the veterans will tell me that whether or not I like or don't like it, they use it. I would say as much as 1 out of 3 or even 2 out of 4, meaning 50% or more people use marijuana for their chronic pain. And it creates a sense of euphoria and creates a sense of well-being. So with that, I'll stop and I'll let other panelists speak, but I'll be happy to discuss this further. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I think Dr. Gupta has brought up something that's really quite true, which is that medical marijuana does have an effect, a positive effect on those individuals who have cancer pain, who might have muscle spasms. So I think most of us would recognize that there is clearly a medical use. The struggle I have as a physician now that's been in this community is just one of the biggest things is I saw children back in the 90s who who are now either young adults or deceased. And I have several of my young patients who have gone that way. If you say, well, why would you say that, doc? The truth is, we talked about this being a gateway drug, and there are truly probably people in this audience who may have used it or still use it, and it hasn't progressed to that point. Unfortunately, there are more than enough children that can get in trouble. But that's not the biggest issue. It's just all the things that it does that we don't realize. So when you think about our society, you know, whether it be alcohol, whether it be tobacco or the internet, we embrace these things and we sort of march forward. And then all of a sudden, 5 years later, 10 years later, 30 years later, we discover, gee, look what's happening. Well, in some ways, recognizing all the potential benefits of marijuana medically, no one really has been able to study the effects, the side effects. So if you have a friend or an acquaintance, or you don't have a friend or an acquaintance that's done it, you recognize that they may have euphoria. They also may get the munchies. But there are other things that happen in terms of loss of concern, loss of drive to succeed, indifference to succeed. And that's just on the superficial side, the outside. On the inside, we're not paying attention to what it does to the brain. So when you look at marijuana, one of the key aspects is that it mimics, or it looks just like one of the chemicals in the brain. And I'd actually have to read it. It's an anandamide. But anandamide is one of our neurochemicals in the brain. Well, it's an important part of our brain, but the THC resembles it. So then it goes and catches the brain receptors. And if you say, well, what happens, doc? Well, it affects attention, it affects concentration, it affects memory. But when they start to look at it, they actually see that there are some changes in terms of the structure of the brain. So I do not pretend to be an expert in terms of a radiologist, but when they actually look at the studies, they can look at the ventricles, which are the brain has lots of tissue, but also has conducting systems where fluids are taken away. And they begin to see that there are changes. Now, no one can prove that the marijuana did it. It's just that if you take what they call control patients who don't take marijuana and you compare it to patients who do, you start to see that there are differences. So as a physician, I agree wholeheartedly in the potential benefits. I struggle with recreational use, but in fairness, for those of us that use alcohol, that can cause problems. There's nothing out there that doesn't cause a potential problem. But the tragedy is that children can't walk into a store. Well, they can't get alcohol from their friend. I thought about this for some time. But I can't tell you how many children will go to school and go to the bathroom and vape or smoke a joint or do something, whether they be 8 years old or 10 years old or 12 years old. And the tragedy is their minds are developing until they're 25 or 26. My wife would say mine is still developing and I'm not there. But that being said, we really have this struggle. How do we protect the child? Because they're going to do impulsive things. And I think there really is a concern on my part that we're going to damage our children. If I knew that it was going to be used medically only, I'd have no problem. If they find in studies that recreational use, probably not smoking or vaping, but if they find in recreational use that it was safe someday after doing studies, then that might be a whole difference. But I don't think we have that data. I think when you start to think about smoking and vaping, people don't realize we know what smoking cigarettes does. We know what tobacco does. We somehow have this illusion that smoking a bong or smoking a joint is not going to do the same things to our lung or our heart. And I suspect that we're going to discover, and I think it probably can't be proven yet, but that people who have suffered severe lung disease or heart disease may have had a contributing factor. If you look at the list, I mean, there are symptoms that really are wide, but the biggest concern is anecdotal, so I can't tell you a study. But when I look back in my years here, and I've been blessed to be in the same community now, taking care of children, I've seen most of our children blossom and do well. But I've also seen a lot, I can't tell you the number of funerals that I've either attended or I was not able to attend of young kids I took care of. And they didn't die from my medicine, they didn't die from suicide, but they died from their drug use. And that doesn't even speak to the people that end up doing things criminally to get the drugs. So then you have a sweet young man who ends up in front of Judge Ammons, and he's now 17 or 18, and there has to be a legal consequence. So as we sit forward today, medical recreation, I think they're two separate things. If you say, well, Doc, you're being a hypocrite, what about alcohol? I struggle with alcohol. If you say, Doc, what's the biggest side effect from marijuana? Believe it or not, it's accidents. And I was talking to our legal side, the sheriff. There's really no way to test how many of our adolescents who have an accident or a young adult who has an accident and they're under the influence. But it was striking. I was expecting them to focus on A, B, and C, and honestly, it says the most significant side effect, the most serious side effect is increased risk of car crashes. It was not on my register. It was a surprise when I read it. The other thing that sometimes happens, and it happens in our ER, is every once in a while one of our children, and it doesn't happen often, but the children gets a gummy or a brownie. I think in this past year I've been called to the ER probably 4 or 5 times where a 12-year-old took brother or sister's candy. But the other thing is sometimes you have someone who goes to a party and unannounced takes something. Last but not least, we don't know what's in the marijuana anymore. Whether it's laced with fentanyl, whether it's laced with methamphetamine, the concentration of marijuana has probably increased 30-fold since the 1970s. So I think that we have a lot to learn, but everything I know thus far would be that it's a danger to go beyond medicine, and even that should be tightly controlled. Dr. Gupta and I were talking. This is not something that we let them create these doc-in-the-boxes where you go and get a script and you give them $50 and get a script. I think clearly if we're going to do medicine and provide marijuana, it should be tightly regulated and provided. I think anyone in pain, anyone with spasms, should have the privilege of having his symptoms taken care of. But I look forward to discussion. Thank you.
Well, we've heard a lot already, and a lot of, I think, really relevant points about the benefits and the harms. I study ethics, and in particular bioethics, so the ethical issues that come when we discuss medical concerns and how those might relate to public policy. And so I thought something helpful that I could contribute to the discussion is what are the principles of bioethics? And when we're faced with a really complex ethical dilemma that relates to medicine or medical care, what are some of the principles we can use to discuss that issue? And bioethics has 4 main principles. There's the principle of autonomy, so the idea that we want to respect the decision making. And in the US, we talk a lot about synonyms of autonomy, liberty, freedom. That's something that we really value a lot in our culture, is allowing adults to make decisions for themselves. And so when we talk about medical issues, many times our default is to allow adults to make decisions for themselves, sometimes with the guidance of a medical provider, sometimes on their own. And sometimes we don't. You could think of maybe an example could be people's diets. We don't have any laws about what people can eat in their diets, adults in the US. And some of our diets do beneficial things for us, and some of our diets don't. But we believe that adults make those decisions for themselves and what fits their values. But then something like seatbelts. We actually do have laws around seatbelts and believe that people should have to wear their seatbelt to prevent harm to themselves. Even if they're an adult and they can make decisions on how they want to drive their car, we have laws on seatbelts. So sometimes we make decisions as a society in our public policies that we want to overstep people's autonomy and put laws in place to protect them. And sometimes we don't. We want to allow adults to make decisions. So I think autonomy is a principle that's useful for these conversations. A second principle of bioethics is beneficence, the idea that we want to promote people's well-being. We want to make decisions that help people live good lives and live their lives to the fullest and to flourish. And if you're going to apply that to the case of legalizing medical marijuana, that might be a doctor that sees medical marijuana as the most appropriate treatment for their patient, a patient that's suffering from chronic pain or nausea or multiple sclerosis. Those are all things that medical marijuana can help treat symptoms of. And following the principle of beneficence might mean a doctor prescribing that to their patient. There's also the principle of non-maleficence, which is avoiding harm, so not doing harm to people. That comes up when we have trials and studies and clinical trials. We don't want to harm people that are volunteering to help us do medical research. So in the case of legal marijuana, I believe our doctors have mentioned that it's currently a Schedule I classification as a controlled substance, and that actually stops a lot of the funding that could be given for clinical trials to take place to study the effects of legalizing medical marijuana. So sometimes when people say that we don't have evidence of how medical marijuana impacts certain people with certain conditions, it's not that we have evidence that it causes harm in some ways, it's that we don't have the evidence at all. We haven't been able to conduct the trials. We haven't been able to complete the studies because the funding isn't there. And so sometimes funding for those studies is actually non-maleficence. It's allowing us to gain better understanding, to gain information, to push science forward and understand these things. And then the last principle of bioethics is justice. It's fairness. It's allowing everyone to be treated equally and the same. And sometimes that means that we need to legalize things that are disproportionately impacting marginalized communities, and that people ought to have the right to everyone have the right to access perhaps a treatment that could do them well depending on the condition that they have. So I find those principles helpful for discussing medical marijuana or any kind of ethical case. We can talk about it at the individual level, how an individual adult might make a decision with their doctor. The situation becomes much more complex when we talk about children, but we can talk about it at the individual level, and we also can discuss the issue at the population level of what would it look like for all of society if we had legalized marijuana. I tried to look up what studies there were. There are a few, but some suggest that in states where they have legalized marijuana for medical purposes, overall Medicaid and Medicare spending has gone down, so overall state expenditures on those healthcare systems have gone down, and that benefits an entire community because the money that we spend on Medicare and Medicaid comes from taxes and from taxpayers and comes from our overall budget, so perhaps it has benefits at the social level. Or it maybe has society level issues, for example, with the opioid epidemic, and that we have people losing their lives to opioid addiction. And some beginning evidence says that legalizing medical marijuana won't necessarily reduce opioid use, but it could reduce opioid mortality. And the thought process there is perhaps people are substituting benzodiazepine for medical marijuana. And so instead of having these really harmful interactions with another sedative that they're taking in addition to opioids, perhaps they're using something else, and overall deaths are reduced, perhaps not use. So different types of considerations for the individual and their doctor, or maybe for society overall, but I think these principles are helpful when we're having that conversation on something that's not so black and white. So that's what I wanted to contribute to the conversation.
Wow, so I got that panel to follow. And then there is the law. So the law is clear. I will try to make an attempt to speak for not only the sheriff's office, but all law enforcement in this area. So my background takes me to some different locations outside of where these guys have been. I've done many years of undercover drug operations with the sheriff's office. I've been in the houses buying the drugs and doing all these things whenever we arrest people and we take their narcotics. Let's try to stay with the case study because I can sit here and talk to you about drugs all day long as it relates to what's here in Cumberland County. Trying to stay with the case study as far as the sheriff's office goes, and the years that I worked undercover narcotics, I've never been to anyone's house where they were growing their own drugs or growing their own marijuana for medicinal purposes. 2 or 3 plants really doesn't hit the radar on anything going on in Cumberland County. Whenever I see a marijuana grow, we're talking about a house that has been rented and transformed into a marijuana location for marijuana sale and distributing. So let's talk about all these different locations outside of North Carolina now that have legalized. What we have seen is California is sending bales and bales of marijuana here. We have seen Colorado sending bales and bales through the U.S. Postal Service, through FedEx, through UPS here and getting delivered. We are seeing all this deterioration in the family structure with this going on with the narcotics that are out there today. And as they have alluded already, some of the marijuana that is being obtained is not like the marijuana you may think, well, I'm growing it in my backyard, I'm clipping the bud off, and I am smoking, drying that bud out and smoking it. Those days, if you believe that, are long gone. Everything that we have seen, it is not just marijuana. There are fentanyl, there are opium involved in it, and there are an array of different narcotics intertwined in that. Not to say that it was intentionally done, but whenever you start belling this stuff up, marijuana isn't the only thing at the time that's being packaged for sale and delivery. They are also dealing in other narcotics at the same time. So when we go on narcotics drug raids, like you've seen, maybe not quite to the extent of what was on the video, kind of have to laugh at that a little bit, I just have to tell you. They try to do a good job, but that's, I mean, it kind of makes law enforcement look funny when we do that. It's a little bit more, it's not such a performance like that. But when we go out and do that, we see not only just marijuana, but we see loads of other narcotics as well. It can be pills, it can be powder. We can have a combination of powders being mixed at one location. We see marijuana, we see all kind of things. So it's just not one. Now, I've done many interviews whenever I've arrested people, hundreds of hours worth of interview, because not only do we take things for prosecution with the sheriff's office to the state level, but we also take a lot of our cases from Cumberland County to the federal level. So whenever I interview people, whoever it may be, we always start out just getting to know the people. And as we talk to people, we're like, hey, what was the first drug you ever took? And 100% of the time, as I'm speaking to you here now, marijuana is always the very first drug that they started with. And I even back up even further than that. Outside of marijuana, what other kind of illegal substances did you do leading up to marijuana? I drank a whole lot. You drank a whole lot and you got drunk and you went to a party, yeah. And then you started drinking and somebody passed around a blunt and you started smoking, yes sir. And one thing led to another, and then tell me how you moved to the next level. So marijuana on my radar, as far as law enforcement is concerned, is always the gateway drug that starts the whole process. I've never interviewed anybody who was selling large amounts of marijuana or narcotics that ever had a problem with some sort of medical issue here in town. Now, while they may have a medical issue whenever they go up and stand in front of Judge Ammons, whenever they're in front of me, doing an interview with me, it's kind of like, all right, this is how it is and this is how it started. Do I believe that there's a place for medical marijuana in society? There is some things that THC does do help with, and it can, in the right hands, be used in a very positive way. But the common people who are growing narcotics in their backyard and using them and saying the police are bad because they're raiding my house and they're taking all my marijuana, if you want to do it, there are means to go out there and do it the right way. The law is clear. At this time, marijuana is illegal, and law enforcement are enforcing the laws to the extent we are allowed to.
Well, thank you to each of our panelists for those very insightful thoughts. Y'all have done a lot of, or given this topic a lot of thought, and we appreciate that. At this point, we're going to invite audience participation. This is an opportunity for you to ask this distinguished panel any questions you may have. There will be microphones available. If you'll stand up and move towards the center or one of the aisles, they'll bring a microphone to you. And my experience is that it's always challenging to get the first person to come forward and answer a question. So it just seems appropriate that whoever wants to ask the first question can have some gummy bears. I think we have someone. The microphone will come forward.
Thank you, sir. This question is to the entire panel. From the information that you put out, it seems the problem is control. Everyone up there agreed that there was a use for medical marijuana or the use of marijuana in general. It's just how to get it out there and how to control the access to it. It seems like the first thing we need to do is remove it from Schedule 1 Because as long as it's a Schedule I drug and you can't do your test that you need to do to find out how it can be used and the effects, what do we need to do to get it off of Schedule I so that the proper test can be done? And just like cigarettes that at one time were illegal, and alcohol was one time illegal, eventually it's going to become legal. It's just a matter of when. So how do we control that process to get it off of Schedule I so that you can do your proper test and we can get it out to the individuals that need it?
Well, when I first started my political career 36 years ago, I would have said, you need to talk to your congressman. I think that's kind of useless now. We don't see Congress doing much of anything. When you have 80% of the American public that is in favor of medical marijuana use and you can't get Congress to do anything, that's why you've seen these the executive level folks changing the policies. But you've got to control it, I think, from the production. You can't just let people grow it like a regular farmer. You got to control the production, you got to control the distribution, you got to control the prescription of it.
I do not know how we can get it off Schedule I from a standpoint of regulatory control. But I do believe, I think currently it's 36, Judge Hammond said, I think it might be 38 states and a District of Columbia that have permitted medical use of marijuana. I think ultimately it is the people. Ultimately it is the US citizens that have the voting power that can somehow find a way to bring this into the national discussion. But I agree with you, it's just not that simple anymore. It is so divided and it's so polarizing an issue that it loses the main focus, whether or not there is a place for medical marijuana, and I think majority of us seem to agree that there is a place, even if it is very restricted when we listen to Sheriff Raich, or somewhere more liberal than that, but under a controlled environment. And the question is, can we force the Congress to act and look at this in a more meaningful way? That's the only place I think it will take. Other than the state medical boards, and again, that's a state issue. It's not really a national then in that case. So.
I wish that we had the answer. I don't. It was striking that they're just not studies that are done. There are lots of what we call anecdotal. They do something and they find some commonality, but they can't say cause. I think moving forward, probably it really is going to, we really have to rely on our leadership, because neither of us or any of us really have the individual power to make that happen. And I think, your comments that, 80% believe in medicinal, probably 35, 1 out of 3 in a typical population probably use marijuana. And they're successful citizens and they may do okay. 1 out of 10 adults actually might develop a substance use dependence on marijuana. The tragedy is with kids, it goes to 1 out of 6. And how do we keep it out of the children's hands? So I don't think any of us would claim that the medicinal marijuana causes our national problem. I think the most anecdotal studies suggest that people who are given 6 prescriptions or 6 pills use the 6. It's when it gets outside, and it's what you alluded to. How do you control it? Unless you have laws that hold people responsible, and I don't want to keep creating laws, but if you get the marijuana and they can discover that you gave it to your kids or your kids picked up on it, it just gets to be I hate to say it, it's a quagmire. How do you fix this? So the best thing I feel we could do is educate people of the potential benefits and side effects as we know it. I don't think that those comments that we shared about side effects were make-believe. I think it's real. Any of us that have practiced know that it's real. It may be hard for you to believe that your ventricle is becoming larger if you smoke marijuana. And it may never cause an effect, but there's a structural change. So as we move forward, great question, sir. I don't think any of our congressmen or senator people that are running for office, they don't talk about this. And I shouldn't say this, but my gut feeling is they recognize 1 out of 3 use, and it's just a topic that they stay away from. And that's my perception. I have no proof for that. So I don't have a good answer, but it's a great question. And maybe that's something that we'll find and bring back to FTCC later.
Would anyone else like to address this?
I'm not an expert on that type of regulation, but I would say also, in addition to our politicians being ones that have the opportunity to change the laws, we also have the federal regulatory system and things like the Food and Drug Administration, which is a body that would have the ability to fund studies and research.
Thank you for your question. As far as the sheriff's office will be concerned, or law enforcement across the board, we see it this way. Right now, it's illegal. If you can figure out a way of making it not be illegal, we're good with it. We have a problem with it as well because it's everywhere. It's like fireworks on the 4th of July. It's hard for us to control. It's hard for us to handle because there's so much of it out there. But a firework in the hand of a kid is no less dangerous if it goes off. So it ain't just you that is consuming the narcotic or whoever. The young kids are getting it nowadays, and they're getting it, again, it's not just plain marijuana, it's a mixture. And those are the problems that people have to deal with whenever they look at this and try to figure out what's the best way of handling this and legalizing it. I appreciate your question, but I don't really have a straightforward answer for you. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. For our next question, let's come to this side of the room. Sir.
My question was, one of you were talking about the effects of marijuana, and one of the main effects was the accidents it caused. And one of those accidents were car accidents or maybe like a fist fight or something like that. And that sounded a lot similar to how alcohol can be affected to a lot of citizens. And my question is, how can we justify one use of alcohol that's very similar to the use of marijuana, but legalize only one of them?
I was going to speak to alcohol simply because I feel like the society, for some reason, has accepted alcohol as an acceptable
Vice.
Yeah, acceptable vice. It is permissive. It is, it's something that you celebrate a football game or a victory or some sort of a success at even an academic achievement followed by a party in which alcohol is served freely and accepted as a nice celebration. Without alcohol, some people wonder why you're even here. And I, as a gastroenterologist and a liver doctor, I find that to be really troublesome because I think alcohol is extremely dangerous. There is clearly no doubt in my mind. I am listening to Major Ray speak about marijuana as a gateway drug. But my argument is alcohol is an incredibly powerful gateway drug because it is a drug. And it's accepted, and I stand in the grocery store and I watch people carrying beer, just incredible amounts. I'm saying to myself, is this for one person, two people, maybe 25 people? And it's just consumed without any second thought. So as a doctor, I would say to you, it's absolutely the same, if anything worse. And I do not think that we should condone drinking alcohol in any form. Veterans will come to the hospital I ask them, do you drink? Drink what, doc? Drink alcohol. Oh, no, not at all. How about beer? Beer is not alcohol, man. I drink beer. How much do you drink? Depends, doc, what I'm doing. On a weekend, maybe 12-pack. Depends. If I'm watching a game and if my friends are over, I'm drinking a lot more than that. So what I'm saying is it's just not acceptable. And I see the deleterious effects of beer drinking, even in moderate quantities, on people. It's like Russian roulette. You just don't know who's going to get hit. There are some people who escape the ill effects of beer and alcohol, but the majority don't. And we don't hear about them. They turn yellow, they die in the hospital. So yeah.
In support of your comment, you're absolutely correct. I don't know that any of us would condone alcohol. I think the only way, because you reflect on this, you have to be 21 to go to a store or a restaurant to drink. You can't go to a store and purchase it. And maybe during the early 20th century when they were selling illegal alcohol everywhere, maybe it was the same as marijuana. But right now, marijuana you can get from your classmate. You don't have to go to a store. It's not regulated. If you buy a beer, it's destructive. I have a family member that died from alcohol. I know how serious it is. But the tragedy is there's still societal processes that try to structure it. And I think when you finally first see your first 7-year-old who smoked a joint, or you have a 12-year-old that's bringing in flasks that look like water and he's got vodka, and this happens on a pretty regular basis, then you begin to realize that there are issues out there that we have to control. So that kid with the vodka is unusual, but it has happened. But marijuana, they can bring in their pack and go into the bathroom and do it all the time. So none of us, I don't think any of us would condone alcohol use. That's not what we're suggesting. And most of our young people would say exactly what you're saying, and it's a good point. How can you condone it? We're not. I think society has some structural things that prevent more use. And if I knew that, I don't know how young you are, but if I knew that my young people's brains were protected till 24, 25, then I'd feel much better. I think it's pretty clear that if an adolescent starts using, he has a 1 in 6 chance of becoming dependent. So that's not, hey, I'm going to use it when I want. That's a lot, and it's really not a train. But it's a great question, and I think most of us, if we take a second to think, realize it's illegitimate, just like cigarettes. Just like we just did gambling. Well, I shouldn't touch this, but what's going to happen? How many people are going to run out of funds? How many people are going to end up stealing to pay their gambling debts? Everything's out there, and I think it's just how do we protect people or help people make the best decision.
Thank you for asking that question, though.
Next question, please.
Hi, born and raised in Cumberland County, in the county and in the city. Cognitive dissonance. I'm still confused about everything you all have mentioned, because I can walk to a store and buy gummies with THC in it. But I think I heard you say it is illegal. So is it illegal from a certain perspective of amount of THC? Because I'm still confused. So that's one thing, right? The other thing is, someone talked about empathy, sympathy, compassion, commerce. I think that's what it's all about, but my question is this. You talk about addictions. I moved away and graduated high school when I was 16. My daughter and I came back in 2018, and every single one of my senior relatives are on all kinds of medication for diabetes, sugar, natural occurring thing, right? That nobody wants to talk about. But as me, I'll tell you my situation. I suffer from these things you all speak of. My doctors have prescribed 17 different things that don't work. They don't work. I am a farmer. I own land in this county, and I pay taxes, and I'm confused. So I'm here at this school trying to unconfuse myself, and I'm glad I'm here to hear all the things you all have mentioned, because I've been a part of all these things. Illegally arrested for, not these things, not marijuana use, right? But I need to understand it, because I need something, because I'm 48, right? I have a 20-year-old. We suffer from the same things, like asthma, like all these things that are in my family, but we do not have diabetes. We do not. So I just wonder, has there been a study, THC versus sugar, diabetes, and all the things you talked about? How much candy did you eat today? Or why can't you focus today? How much candy did you eat? Just like, did you drink? Those kinds of things. Has that been studied?
So did I hear you say that you can go to a store and buy THC?
I went to a store that sells these things with hemp. I think it might be hemp THC. I don't know.
No. I hope not.
I don't know.
I hope not in North Carolina.
These stores.
Terry,
I got this. I got this. again, you go down a rabbit hole with me. I've got more information than I can get out in the allotted time, so I tried not to overwhelm you. Yes, the vape stores are selling illegal stuff. Yes, they are selling stuff that is illegal. Bath salts are illegal. Some of these things that you're in, that not you in specifically, but some of the things that people are ingesting are illegal that you can buy from these stores. There is going to be, heads up, we are going to fix that, but it's going to take time. It is being, we do know about it. We know who the offenders are, and it is just like video poker. Matter of time, when the cog turns, it's going to be your day, and then whatever happens on that day, you're going to be a superstar. So yes, to your point, you may go to a convenience store, depending on where it's at. You may be able to purchase something in the pack behind the counter that may have something on there. Guess what? That's from China. It ain't from here. We ain't making it locally. It's being brought in and sold. And who are they targeting? They're targeting your kids. And I got a bunch of people to my right that are a whole lot smarter than me that can tell you why it's bad. I can tell you for a fact it is illegal, and we are monitoring it.
I think you mentioned something about THC and blood sugar or diabetes, and to the best of my knowledge, there is no benefit of THC on controlling blood sugar, managing blood sugar, altering blood sugar, or treating diabetes. So if one has diabetes, which means inability to control blood sugar from your innate availability of insulin, or you have to use an extraneous drug, you have to do that in order to maintain good blood sugar control. It is an incredible problem in the community, and I think we need to pay close attention to our dietary habits, exercise, and control of blood sugar, assuming that it's not hereditary.
In support of Dr. Gupta, I think there are four main areas that we currently know scientifically that there is benefit. So pain, muscle spasms, severe nausea. So if someone comes in with severe nausea, and epilepsy, there's some rare children's seizure disorders that the THC can actually help. Everything else becomes folklore. So whether they tell you about glaucoma, even when they talk about MS, we believe people say that it helps, but there's no science. MS might be different. Depends if it's the shakes, if it's the muscle movements or not. But there's so much talk that people accept the talk and make it real. So I think the gentleman that said, how do we study, that's great. How do we finally get studies that actually prove it? And maybe in your children's generation, they'll finally get that done.
Yes, sir. Or yes, ma'am, sorry.
Hi, my name is Brenda Harris, and I never thought that I would approve of medicinal marijuana use until my mother had cancer. And me and my sisters had to make a decision because she stopped eating and she was nauseated at Duke. But however, when we did say, the doctor asked us wanted her to receive it, we decided to let her receive it. However, the side effects were so bad, she pulled out her IVs, that we immediately told her to stop. So, controlling the side effects of giving a patient that has never had it before, what things do you do to control the side effects? Because we decided against it totally.
So like any other drug, it has incredible side effects, and the question is, what is it being used for, and what is the dose that it is being given? And I think it has to be very small, something that an individual A may tolerate a very small dose, an individual B who might be an elderly person might tolerate much smaller dose, because even the normal dose would be a large dose for a person who's unable to metabolize a standard dose. So the side effects can be adjusted or dealt with, either adjusting the dose or B, treating those symptoms as they arise. Really is a question about what indication. So if somebody is using, for example, THC delta 9 for refractory nausea or vomiting, then we would use X amount of medicine. And if somebody is using it for pain, it would be Y. They're not the same. I hope that answers your question. I mean, it really is not one prescription fits all. It does not. It doesn't work that way. There is no doubt that there are significant side effects. And that's true with morphine, and that's true with any opiate, or that's true with any narcotic. That is true with any chemotherapy. My argument is you have to have it in a proper circumstance, in a proper indication, with proper control.
We'll move over to the other side of the room.
Hello. So I have a couple questions regarding legality and recreational use. And the data that most of these gateways, or the marijuana gateway reference to, because to me it sounds like marijuana, if legalized, it would be more regulated. Therefore, it would keep it cleaner off the streets. What are the chances of these children who are actually using off the streets are coming from troubled households? And then on top of that, they're getting put on the laced stuff that are already on the streets, and then creating that gateway effect to other opioids and that sort of thing. And we also know from the psychedelic research, ketamine in North Carolina, that providing funding or legalizing would provide funding for these tests that we need to do to be able to further define the results that we're looking for.
Before we take a guilty plea to any crime in court, we ask a whole bunch of questions. And one of those questions is, are you now under the influence of alcohol, drugs, narcotics, medicines, pills, or any other substances? When's the last time you used anything? What was that? When did you begin using it? And I find that at least 75% of the crimes that folks plead guilty to, whether that be illegal drug possession, or hurting somebody while under the influence of drugs, or stealing something to buy drugs, 75% of those involve marijuana. And when I ask them, how long you been using it? I hear, 12. I go, 12 years? They go, no, since I was 12. I've been using it since I was 10, 11, 12, 16. I've been using it 30 years. I also have their records. And I can see a lot of times these criminal records that are 30, 35 years old, they start with simple possession of marijuana, larceny, something like that. Now they're up to dealing drugs. Now they're up to hurting people under the influence of drugs, and more likely stealing things on a routine basis to buy these drugs. So it's not a victimless crime. It is not something that people just do a little. And regulating it, I think, would help with some of the illegal sales, but, everybody builds a better mousetrap. If going down to the marijuana store with my marijuana prescription costs me $10 for a bag, somebody's gonna find a way to sell that same stuff to me for $5 a bag on the street. So it's not a panacea, it's not a fix for all of this. But like we've all talked about, the key is, or to me the key is, preventing use of alcohol, drugs, any other stimulants to people who are under 25 years of age, because their brains are just not formed yet, and they are forming lifelong patterns. Having been a judge for 36 years, I have sentenced several people to long terms in prison, and I look at their record and I go, hey, Steve, how are you? And I've known Steve for 30 years because I started with him in juvenile court, and I saw him again in district court, and now he's in big-time superior court going to prison for a long period of time. That's disheartening to see a wasted life. And I've seen so many folks who have just become unmotivated, uninspired, and just plain lazy because of chronic drug use. I'm not sure that answered your question.
I guess my question really was, especially for Dr. Leska, my real question was, I don't know if I explained it well because I get weird speaking in front of large panels of people.
Me too.
We know that, adolescent use of drugs comes from largely troubled households, if that makes sense. So, we're talking about, military households, families move from from state to state, and then we're also talking, drug use in the home, and they could get access to drugs, but from
Ma'am, I think you bring up an important point, but I think it was sort of, as a clinician, one of the most striking things is when you discover that the child who's smoking is the cardiologist's son. So I think we fool ourselves if we think it's just lower socioeconomic. I think it's probably more prevalent on the street in certain communities. I mean, I'm not sure we're going to, pick a refined community, whichever town you are. It may not be on the street, but it's in their back pocket. So I think that we fool ourselves if we think it's just, now I believe lower socioeconomic. I think a lot of our children who have had multiple stressors, whether it be divorce, whether it be moves for our military, I can't lie to you, I don't pick up a lot of positive, I don't know if I could say this, but I don't see a lot of positive drug screens on post for the kids. But I'm not sure that the parent who has a kid who has that is going to bring them to me. I shouldn't say that, but it was striking when I was down at Cape Fear Valley or the mental health center, my drug screen rate was much higher. But I'm not suggesting that military children don't do it, it doesn't come to my attention. But I think the one thing I hope you understand is whether it's a general's son, whether it's a governor's child, I think this is an equal opportunity. Anyone is available, and it could be a healthy family and the kid just did it on a whim. Sometimes it's a kid who's bored in school. The most common, there are lots of different threads. Believe it or not, simple ADD, which people sort of say it's not a real thing, but most kids with ADD, they don't use drugs because of the ADD, they use drugs because they get in trouble. Then they started hanging out with kids who get in trouble. And then it becomes sort of like second nature. So you bring up great points, but it's not just lower socioeconomic. It really is a universal challenge for all of us. And the parent who thinks, gee, I'm safe, I live in a nice neighborhood, they go to a great school, I think you're fooling yourself. I think the kids might just be a little smarter, and they may have more funds to hide it.
Thank you for that question. We'll move over to this side of the room.
All right, so I want to deliver a hypothetical mainly to the entire panel of whether or not if we were to...
Can you use the mic?
Oh, sorry. I want to deliver the hypothetical that if we were to legalize marijuana in all 50 states and how that would be compared to now.
If I heard you right, and I'm going to ask Judge Ammons to comment first probably. If you were to legalize marijuana for recreational use, is what you're saying, or?
Primarily medicinal and primarily medicinal for how I believe it was you that brought up how we would have to restrict it for not just prescription shops, but mainly the higher end prescription areas. But if we were to legalize it mainly just for medicinal.
So currently it's legal in 38 states and District of Columbia. You're asking the question, what would be the consequence or what would be the methodology? Is that what you're asking?
More the methodology.
Well, in some of the states that have legalized it, they have found that there's a larger percentage of babies being born with drugs in their system, marijuana in their system. They've also found that the accident rate for motor vehicles is going up. I'm not sure there's a lot of studies about the correlation, but it's just anecdotally, we see those things in some of the states that have legalized it. As Terry said, we also see that there's a growing economy in those states, shipping that stuff out to North Carolina and other places. Hardly a week goes by that I don't do a search warrant for law enforcement officers who have found a package coming through the post office or UPS here because that marijuana that was legally grown out there is now put in interstate commerce, just like the government said would happen in Gonzalez, and it's coming to other states and being sold on the streets where it is illegal. I don't think legalizing marijuana for medical purposes or even for recreational purposes is going to solve a lot of the crime problems. What concerns me most is that people who legitimately need it, who have a legitimate use for it, approved by their doctor, who've made an informed choice. I know the benefits, I know the side effects, this is what I want to do. Like Ms. Raich, who it helped, and who said, despite what the Supreme Court says, I'm going to continue to use it. I think it's cruel of society to deny that compassionate care to folks who legitimately need it.
Let me pose one more thing with that. So think about this, folks. We legalize marijuana for medical use only. You're going to have a doctor that's going to prescribe it. And I got this going on right now as you sit in your chairs. The patient goes in and gets his subscription for whatever kind of narcotic that the doctor prescribes. They may need a little extra money to pay their bills at the end of the day. They walk out of the pharmacy, walk to the side of the road or walk to their car where the dealer is waiting to purchase that, and they take that from that point and move it to another location where somebody else is using it. So to legalize it for medical purposes, it's going to be very complicated to track that, because we have people at the VA right now that are on incomes that they need extra money in this economy just to survive. And we have got them, they're picking their prescriptions up at the VA, they're walking to Ramsey Street where the dealer is waiting, and they're selling their prescription pills, and they're moving them just that quick. I've done a case where I've arrested a person who had $20,000 worth of prescription pills on one stop where they were picking up from a rest home where the medication got diverted. That's just how easy it is to do. So we got a lot of challenges. It's very hard it sounds easy in the beginning, but when you start working through the issues, it's very complicated to keep those medications with that one person.
Yeah.
This is a written question someone has specifically from Major Ray. Almost every day I smell marijuana from a passenger car or in public areas. What should citizens do? Would the police respond to a call about smoking marijuana in public?
It's like the 4th of July lighting fireworks. I mean, I've smelled it going down the road. You've smelled it going down the road. I see the car in front of me. I see the guy smoking going down the road. Hey, it's marijuana. It doesn't affect anybody. Well, I can tell you it affects me, because it about chokes me out when I smell it. My kids have to deal with it. I have to deal with it. You're dealing with it out here in the audience. Some of you may or may not smoke. But for those of you who don't, it's very irritating to have to get behind a car like that and have to smell that marijuana. Well, it's not affecting you. Well, yes, it is affecting me. I have to smell it's not like drinking where you put it in your body and you can get away from the person. Whenever you start smoking that, some of that, bad weed, it really smells to high heaven. What is law enforcement doing? If we can catch the person driving, if there is actually a law enforcement officer that pulls up behind the car, it is just like if you're drinking alcohol. If you're driving down the road and you have consumed enough of it to appreciably impair your mental faculties, you can be arrested for DWI. It's a blood test. You have to go to Cape Fear Valley. We draw blood just like a DWI. Long-term wise, what are we doing on it? It's just like all the four-wheelers and motorcycles riding through Fayetteville. It's happening everywhere. It's almost impossible until society gets tired of it. It's going to be very difficult to curtail.
Thank you. We'll move to this side.
Let's hypothetically say that you do legalize it and it's still known as a gateway drug. So therefore, how would you handle the fact that it kind of opens a door being like, because weed wears off eventually. Some people, it just don't affect them anymore. It doesn't do the same effects that it did before, to make them feel calm and feel better and stuff. How are you going to prevent them from opening that door trying to go find something stronger, like fentanyl and other things like that?
I think the problem is you can't. That's the honest truth. You can't prevent it from spreading. one of you potentially in your young college days, or for the older folk, may have tried it once and never had it again. You know, obviously that's a blessing. But the odds are most people, once they start, they do feel the euphoria. They do feel, gee, I failed my physics, I failed my count, it doesn't matter. I'll smoke another joint with you and we'll feel much better. Then all of a sudden they will find something else. And even if they don't go looking, someone's going to come and say, hey, look what I just got. So I want to tell you, everyone that I've ever met that's gotten down pretty far down the road tells me, Doc, I never thought this would happen. You know, young kids, you know, all of us have done something impulsive when we were younger. I think virtually all of us. But when you start doing certain things, if you entertain drugs or alcohol, you really run the risk of getting into trouble. So I think that's the whole premise, that medicinal is wonderful if it's maintained. Dr. Gupta said it quite eloquently. We have to keep it, but how do you do that? They say that people who get it medicinally generally don't sell because it's theirs. They're using it for their illness. But once you start opening the door, what if a grandchild's visiting? You know, what if in the states where it's recreational, they come and visit us here in North Carolina and they share it with you? So I think the cat's out of the bag. The question is, what can we do to prevent it from just becoming, you know, fulminant all over the place? And my hope is that each of you will be more thoughtful, and you don't have to take what we say for granted, but go back and research it. And if you have some friends, see what's happened to them. But once you embrace it and discover, you know what, alcohol's not good for you, marijuana's not good, tobacco's not good, sugar's not good. Once you begin to realize these things, then you're going to take health into your own hands. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I have two questions. One's about medical marijuana use, and the other is about recreation. Now, the medical part, my mother had cancer, and she had got off chemo, and I didn't want to go on chemo, and she got on herbs and stuff, and I fussed, and I made cuts. I said, hey, this stuff came back in your system again, and it's the second time, and the person that's telling you to do this, they have no real, they're not an expert in dealing with cancer. They felt like they had degrees and stuff that they could do this, and they gave her medical liquid marijuana, and she had told me it was giving her nightmares. And she died of cancer, you know. And my thing with this being a Schedule I drug and you can't research it yet, even if you start to research this, if it helps one person, how would you know what help the other person the same way? See, I just had a real problem with her going to try that stuff because she was scared and everything. And the person that got to do it, they live that's life now, you know what I'm saying? And I just really got a question about that because I'm all for the medical marijuana if it's beneficial to that person, it's really helping. But if you have no research on it though, and you just use people as guinea pigs, I feel like that's wrong. And then my next question is recreation. Are we a society for the craving of the marijuana like we did prohibition back in the days? You know, because I feel like it's everywhere and people want it, so I feel like the government's trying to maybe just make money off of us. If you can't stop them and everything, we just make money off of it.
John James.
You know, I think you bring up a point, whether your mother's being treated for cancer or whether your mother's being treated for hypertension, it's really going to be the relationship with that doctor. And I'd like to tell you that each and every one of us is thoughtful, but if you don't have a clinician that's thoughtful, then all of us can get in trouble. So as a medical profession, I think we do a very fine job. But if you have someone, it's wonderful that you were an advocate for Mom, but a lot of our people, they can't speak for themselves or they have trouble understanding. And I think it's a struggle as a clinician is how do we protect our patients? And I think most of us, the blessing is I think most physicians really do intend to do good. And one of the things that we are told, you know, one of our vows is we're not going to do harm. But unfortunately, people can have. I think we probably gave a false thing. They have not, when we talk about studies, they would take 1,000 people who aren't on medicine, 1,000 people who are, they match them up, and they do a study. What we have, the data that shows that it does support pain or hyperemesis, you know, when the patient's vomiting or they're losing weight, They actually do have studies where we've given it to 60 patients and they all gained 4.5 kilograms. But to do a true comparison study, that's where they haven't done it. And so we may have confused you by that. I think they do have some studies, but they have not done the studies that we'd like to see them do.
And I seen somebody, the person that did that, they was going off of that, well, the chemo's not working, and they were close to my mother too. It was a family member. And so we do the herbs and stuff. She went with the herbs and the liquid marijuana and stuff. And she told me she wasn't taking it, wasn't giving nightmares. And by that time, she was already on hospice and stuff. You know, I was like, that was a waste. You know, like, I was right the first time. Let's just try this way. And then let's try the other way, because that's the gray area, you know what I'm saying? It's a very gray area with the medical stuff if it's not proven to work with somebody.
And just so you, and I'm talking too much, there's nothing that's 100%. So Dr. Gupta and I can have a medicine that we use, and in the vast majority it works, and every once in a while you give it to someone and either they have a side effect, right, or it doesn't work. So I wish I could tell you, we could tell you that all medicines were perfect, and I would share with you just simple Tylenol, Motrin. Anything we do has potential benefits and side effects. Not to scare you, but that's the reality.
That excludes aspirin and ibuprofen. I mean, I see some folks that have serious outcome from using a fair amount of aspirin or ibuprofen, and they have damaged their kidney or they've damaged the stomach lining, and they can get ulcers, they get bleeding. So just like Dr. Lessica said, any drug has the potential to cause an adverse effect. I think the doctor that you're dealing with, individual.
It wasn't a doctor, that's the thing about it. It wasn't a doctor.
It was a neighbor
No.
family.
Yeah.
That was a close person to her.
Got it.
That convinced her to try this.
Got it.
And they used their own family members as a guinea pig. Because if it worked, they got all the credit. If it didn't work, you got to have a fall guy.
Oh, we're sorry that.
Yeah, that's harsh, right? That's very cold.
Thank you.
Sorry that.
Thanks for that, and we do have time for these last two questions, and then we're going to have to bring this to a conclusion.
Okay, I have a question, a couple comments for the panel. Number one, what are we as the city, the education, doing for our children in schools, educating them about drugs, about marijuana? Would it be possible for each of you to go to a school, appropriate age, and discuss these problems, show a film, have somebody that has an addiction talk about the effects of it, how it's affecting them? And a comment to the doctors, I'm very much aware of the fact that addiction can start in utero. I have seen babies born with nicotine withdrawal, with drug withdrawal. And I don't know if any of you have had that with your children or with yourself. It's sad. It's very sad to see an infant shaking, crying constantly, not being able to eat because the parent had taken drugs during their pregnancy. I don't know if it's possible if a pregnant woman should have a drug test at some point during her pregnancy and get treated or what. But it begins back then. It begins during the pregnancy. It begins at home, teaching, education. And if the parent can't do it, maybe the school should take on the role of educating the kids.
I don't want you to think that I'm the only person who's done this, but for 42 years, as a judge and an assistant district attorney, I've done exactly that. I've gone into the schools. And when I first started 42 years ago as an assistant district attorney, I could go and talk to the assembly. And then the assemblies got a little unruly. So then I would go and I would talk in the library to 2 or 3 classes. And then over the years, they got a little unruly. And now when I do it, I won't do that. I say I'll go to a classroom and I'll spend all day there, but I'm not talking to more than 20 or 30 kids, and I need 2 teachers there because the attention span is not there, the discipline is not there. But I'm a realist, and I try not to be a pessimist. If I go to a school and I talk to 25 kids and I reach 1, that's a life saved, potentially. That's a family saved, and that's some good done. That's just like our juvenile justice system. We have a high failure rate in our juvenile justice system. But every one that we do have a success has an incalculable benefit. So we have to continue to do that. Yes, I agree very, very much that we need to do that in our schools. But we all know that our schools, it's very difficult. It's very difficult in schools now for kids to learn for a variety of societal reasons.
I agree with you with the schools because I volunteer at a school and I see what could possibly be the effects of non-education from home. And it's sad. It's sad. I agree with you.
What we need is volunteers. Everybody can volunteer to go and help a school. Go down and be a mentor to a child or to a class. Go in and help. The teachers welcome this.
I think there is no doubt that if we can reach even one person, like Judge Ammons said, in a class of 25, I think we would have saved that life. Because I think as physicians, as mentors, as educators, we need to reach people at a younger age group to prevent this from becoming what it is already. And as regards, you said that it begins very early, like in utero. There is no doubt if the mother is addicted, the baby is going to be born with the ill effects of a narcotic on board. And there are some folks, I mean, I'm sure Judge Ammons knows, as well as Major Ray, for example, that there are parents who are in the parking lot of a school and they are both on opiates and out of their senses. I mean, they're completely asleep on the wheel.
Ma'am, I think, I can't speak for, I think Dr. Gupta does this, but I know that I have previously talked to communities and schools. I think the issue is sometimes you have to have the invitation to do so, and then really it becomes a slippery slope. If you talk at Pinehurst, then this school wants to do it. So how do you do it and make it thoughtful? And maybe approaching FTCC and creating a podcast or a video or something that can be used, or there was a TV station. You know, how do you educate? But the most important thing is going to come from home. In all honesty, if they don't hear it from home, it doesn't really matter what we say. I'm not a pessimist, but unless mom and dad are sensitive and thoughtful in discussing this, not becoming fanatical, not you know, almost, but unless they hear from home, look, all of these things have a problem. We love you. You're important enough that we'd like you not to do this. I remember, my son, he lives in Connecticut now, but my son was at a party, went to Terry Sanford. It wasn't a party there. It was a party at one of the private schools. And about 10 o'clock on a Friday, he's about 16, he goes, Dad, I didn't bring the car. Can you come pick me up? I don't feel good. So I went and picked him up. I said, well, what's up? I'm neurotic, Dad. You know, Jonathan, what's up? Do I need to call one of my pediatric buddies? And he goes, no, Dad, things were happening. I just didn't feel comfortable. Well, we talked about that for years. Jonathan, if you're ever in a place, Miley, if you're ever in a place, you call us. Once you give that child permission, most kids will take a pause. Some will do the impulse, but some will pause. But I think we can teach all day at the schools, but I think until parents understand this is their child, they have to carry it. But I think if there was a way to support the community, I would venture to bet that Dr. Gupta, myself, and probably a whole host of our colleagues would love to do so.
And I'll just make a few comments on that. If you're in the schools working, God bless you. For those of you who are a little bit older, school ain't what it used to be like. I mean, I don't know if you think back in days gone by what a school used to be like. It is not like that anymore. Sheriff Raich has worked really hard to keep the school resource officers in all the county schools. How many county schools do we have to put an officer at in Cumberland County? Take a guess, 100. 100 county schools here. 100. We have to find 100 SROs to place at those schools. What are the shortages like that the sheriff's office and the city police department and the rest of the town PDs and throughout Cumberland County are facing? I mean, they're very difficult. So to answer your point, we used to have a DARE program back in the day, and because of budget cuts and we needed more money for one thing or another, man, that was that was taken out of the equation early on. And the DARE program really did help young children, elementary school coming up. And I see some of you nodding, so maybe you remember those days gone by. But it really laid the foundation for a young child to know what was right and what was wrong if they didn't get that at the house. We were trying to instill that with our SRO officers or our DARE officers in the school. Unfortunately, being realistic, budget cuts happen and we have to cut the fat on certain programs. The county commissioners have to reach somewhere. The sheriff can only stretch so far with what he's doing. So he has to look at what he's got and what he's got funding for. Yes, I agree we need to have education in schools. And if you folks would like that to happen, you need to be talking to some of those guys, some of those county commissioners. All the schools are county owned and we have a county law enforcement officer there at all the schools, whether it's in Beaver Dam, Spring Lake, Terry Sanford, whatever school you can think of, there is a sheriff's deputy assigned to that. And we try to work with the kids as much as they will let us, but it is, again, what will they allow us to do? And we don't go out and seek those guys out unless we see a problem, because we have so many things going on throughout the day in those schools. That's why having that education with the DARE program was such a good thing early on. But if y'all feel like that is something that you need, that'd be a good thing to ask your county commissioners for.
Thank you. And we've got just a couple of minutes for one last question.
One thing I thought was really interesting about this discussion was the economy discussion, where in some cases we let people make their own decisions, and in other cases we make those decisions for them by passing laws. And so to kind of springboard off of that, when smoking has its roots in cigarettes, but its effects are treated more like alcohol. But when we talk about like drunk driving and like people dying from that, we usually blame the drunk driver more for being alcoholic than alcohol itself. Whereas if we talk about marijuana-related incidents, we talk more about marijuana and its legality and whether or not people should be trusted with being responsible with it on a large scale. So if we're talking about recreational marijuana, when do we blame marijuana itself? And when do we, like for its effects that cause on the body, and when do we blame the people for not using it responsibly?
Maybe Alexandra can.
I mean, that's a great question, and congratulations for the artwork that you made for this event. But I think that there's probably some legal aspects to the question about when we hold people accountable for the decisions they've made and the consequences, and maybe they made that decision when they were still of sound mind, and then they're responsible for the consequences later when they were no longer of sound mind. So I'm sure there's absolutely some ethical implications. But I guess just speaking about autonomy, we've had a lot of great discussions about children, and I think that that's a pretty universal value that we share, I think, in our society, that there's a lot of decisions we think that children are not yet ready to make on their own, and that parents and the community help them make those decisions. So when we talk about autonomy, we're really usually talking about adults that have the ability to weigh the pros and cons. Maybe they need expert help like a doctor to talk through the potential side effects and the potential risks, and they can have that communication and make a decision. And so I think that's what we talk about when we say autonomy. And so I think an adult making an autonomous decision to use a substance that might impair their abilities, I think we're still going to hold that adult accountable for that decision, because they made it when they had all their faculties and when they had all the pros and cons and they made that choice. I think the decisions people make once they've diminished their autonomy by using substances or through injury or any other kind of incapacitation, I think that's a whole other conversation, because their autonomy was diminished. And so the choices they make, I still don't think we necessarily say that the substance is responsible. I think people make the choices when they're autonomous, and then their autonomy may change later.
You know, one of the, you allude to another good point, though, is that part of being an adolescent is feeling invincible. So you're not going to get pregnant, you're not going to have an accident. You know, we just have this sense that we're going to be okay. Now, some adults still have that, and that's a whole separate problem. But it's really very common for all adolescents to have that sense that, gee, that's never going to happen to me. And I think probably every young person that takes their first hit does not ever expect, they're not thinking, what is it going to do to my lungs? What's it going to do to my heart? Someone offers it and says, hey, this is going to make you feel good, and they do it. So I think these are all hard points, and the issue of autonomy, it's a real struggle. You know, alcohol, we have our soldiers go to war at 18, but they can't go to a bar and have I'm not suggesting alcohol is good, but they can't go to a bar and legally have a glass of wine until 21. So I think we have a lot of these opportunities and challenges that maybe our young leaders today, you all out there, may help us be smarter as we move forward. Because I think there's a lot to be said in terms of how do we do this smarter. And I think taking the ethics into and considering it is important. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, let us give a round of applause of thanks to our fine panel. The Living Law Committee has gathered some raffle gifts that we want to give away at this point. I've been told to pick some random numbers, so if you'll look on the back of your program, in the bottom right-hand corner there are numbers. My number is 48, so of course my first number is going to, actually they changed, because I could do that, they've changed the rules on me, so they've given me the numbers. So if you have number 22, anyone have number 22? If you do, come forward. They've got a door prize for you. Anybody with 22? How about number 11? Number 79? Oh, we've got a winner. Oh, look at there, Mr. Williams. All right, continuing down the list, number 8. Number 68. Number 59. Number 16. Oh, we've got another winner. Number 23. Well, this young lady right here in the black plaid shirt. And before our panelists get off the stage, we do want to again thank you for all the work you've done to get ready for this and to join us today. Again, let's give our panel a round of applause. Thank you all for your time.